So without further ado, let's start the session. Handing it over to Melanie.
Thank you very much. And thank you everybody for joining us. Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are joining from. I'm joining from Canada, so it is morning for me. Just wanted to say thank you on behalf of the entire coalition. As I said, my name is Melanie and I am a nutrition specialist at World Vision Canada. I'm joined by an exciting lineup of women who will all introduce themselves shortly. But as Zach said, we do want to start to get to know a bit about you. So I'm going to put up a poll question. We'd love to hear a little bit about which agency you are representing. So if I'm not sure if Lauren could pop up the first question. We'd love for you to give us a sense of where you are currently working. And then you can also move on to the second question because we're focused on gender equality. So we would really love to hear, we would love to hear a little bit what your familiarity is with women's empowerment concepts. So we'll just give a few moments there. Interesting. Okay, a few NGOs. Some academia. Oh, this is going to be a really fun session. We're hoping for a good balance between researchers and practitioners. So wonderful. So while you're filling that out, I'm just going to say, give the background in terms of where we are, what brought us all together, essentially. So this project really started before the Women Deliver conference in 2019. We started as a group of Canadian agencies looking at trying to understand the relationship between gender equality and nutrition. And we quickly recognized that we needed, there was a need for a conceptual framework that describes the complexity of nutrition with an integrated gender equality and women's empowerment lens. So with that in mind, we formalized a coalition in March of last year. Great timing, just as the pandemic kicked off. So the coalition comprises of World Vision Canada, Save the Children Canada, Nutrition International, Action Against Hunger Canada, Briere Research Institute, CARE Canada, Mother Food International, and HealthBridge Canada, with the support and input from Global Affairs Canada. So the coalition has developed a conceptual framework that we call the Gender-Transformative Framework for Nutrition, or the GTFN, which was actually launched at the Nutrition Year of Action event held by the Government of Canada last December. And this year we've really been focused on figuring out how do we operationalize this. So today we're really excited to share with you the framework and to walk through some of the initial thoughts on the development of the guidance tools that we are hoping will support the operational elements of the framework. So I'm going to hand over to Allison, who is going to be our moderator for the next about 2 hours. Allison.
Thanks, Melanie. Hi, everyone. I hope you're well wherever you are in the world. We should have added a poll to find out where everybody is. I'm Allison Riddle. I am an epidemiologist and a research associate at the Briere Research Institute, and I'm representing the organization as part of the coalition. And so we're going to walk through a series of different sessions. The first one giving you an overview of why we decided to go down this road and develop a framework for gender transformative approaches to nutrition, and then talk a bit and introduce you to the framework itself, and then we'll get into some more tools and breakout sessions. So I'm just looking at the poll here. So we have mostly from academia, very nice. Second most is from international NGOs, a few from the private sector, oh, just one, and one from a local NGO, welcome. So in terms of knowledge and experience with women's empowerment concepts, we have, most people have a strong understanding, wonderful, that's exactly who we want to talk to and to get your feedback. And then second closely, somewhat familiar, and we do have a couple experts, so that's wonderful too, so welcome. I'm going to start and I'm going to turn it over to Sarah Pentlow and Sarah Anderson, our two Sarahs who are gender experts with their respective organizations. They'll introduce themselves and they're going to talk about What is a gender transformative approach to nutrition and why it's needed?
Great, thanks, Allison. I can go first. So hi, everybody. My name is Sarah Anderson. I'm a gender equality advisor with Save the Children Canada, based in Ottawa. And Sarah P.
Sure, I'll introduce myself too. So my name is Sarah Pentlow, and I'm a Senior Program Officer for Gender Mainstreaming with Nutrition International, and I'm also based in Ottawa.
Great. Okay, so before we jump into handing it over to our colleagues Amal and Geneviève to kind of present the framework and what it's about and what the different layers are, we just wanted to pause a bit and set the stage for why we think it's so important to address malnutrition through a gender transformative lens. So for some of you, this won't be new, and for some of you, it might be a new way of thinking about malnutrition or nutrition in general. So why do we think it's so important? So gender inequality is both a root cause and an outcome of malnutrition, causing women and girls to experience poor nutrition disproportionately. So there is a lot of data to back this up. In fact, there's so much that we were able to fill 20 pages of a background literature review, which helped inform the GTFN itself, which I said my colleagues will get into in more detail in a moment. But some of the examples of the statistics that we found to back this up are that 60% of the world's people with chronic hunger are women and girls. Micronutrient deficiencies remain significant concerns that disproportionately affect women and girls. Anemia is the leading cause of death for pregnant teenagers and the leading cause of disability for adolescent girls. You can find all of these on the GTFN website. Between 2019 and 2020, women aged 25 to 34 were 25% more likely than men to live in extreme poverty. 31% of young women aged 14 to 15 were not in school, training, or employment, and this was compared to 15% of young men, so double for a little over double for young women. Customary laws and practices have led to insecurity of land tenure, as women can often only acquire rights to land through their husbands and male relatives. And we'll get into this a bit later, why this is an important indicator when we get into our breakout groups and do an activity. And 18% of ever partnered women aged 15 to 49 experienced sexual or physical violence by an intimate partner in the previous 12 months. And I would say that that has probably increased quite a bit during the COVID-19 pandemic. We also know that in many contexts, deeply rooted systemic gender discrimination influences dietary practices. So gender norms or discriminatory gender norms related to food consumption determine who eats last and least, and who eats first and the most and maybe the best quality foods, and what is considered safe, acceptable, affordable, and adequate for various gender and age groups. The power dynamics that govern these social norms for food consumption place restriction on consumption for people with less power, who are most often women and girls, even if they are the ones who typically prepare the food. Maybe to take this idea a bit further, we can see that despite their nutritional vulnerability, women and girls' needs are not adequately supported. So investment in women's nutrition and adolescent girls' nutrition are often focused on improving birth and child nutrition outcomes, and for girls, the nutrition outcomes for their assumed future children. This connection between women and adolescents' girl nutrition and child nutrition outcomes, which is known as the intergenerational cycle of malnutrition, which most of you would know, is well documented and a very important health link, as we know. However, while recognizing the importance of this intergenerational cycle, most national and global nutrition initiatives fail to recognize women and girls as right holders themselves. Thus unintentionally focusing on them as a means to see better outcomes in children, which is known as instrumentalization. So focusing on women and girls more so as instruments for better health outcomes for children. Not only does this lens reinforce the stereotype that womanhood equals motherhood, it also suggests that the health of children is far more important than the health of women and adolescent girls. So we're not saying the intergenerational cycle is not important. It is. It's a very well-known health link, well documented and well researched. But what we're saying here is that we also need to focus on women and girls as human beings and people and right holders themselves, who also have a right to a healthy life and good nutrition regardless of their reproductive capabilities. And with that, I'll hand it over to the other Sarah to maybe continue to set the stage.
Thank you, Sarah. Yes, so thank you so much for bringing in this idea of having a rights-based lens. And I think this is really important because it helps us to begin to think beyond the idea of good nutrition only as a biological need, but really understand that good nutrition is also a foundation for gender equality. So beyond the physiological consequences, we know that the impacts of malnutrition extend to educational achievement, particularly for girls who are anemic. And Sarah already mentioned, the shocking statistic on the prevalence of anemia. And this has a knock-on effect to girls' earning potential and economic empowerment, and also reinforces negative gender stereotypes. So girls who do not complete their education are also more likely to marry earlier as well. And malnutrition can exacerbate gender-based violence, where women's physical capabilities have weakened and they experience greater challenges in performing their household responsibilities. So to truly make progress on improving the nutritional status of women and girls, we need to create opportunities for livelihoods, savings, good hygiene, and improved literacy, to name but just a few interventions. But additionally, we need to be challenging these gender norms that disproportionately bear on women and girls' nutritional status. And this starts by recognizing the depth and breadth of their needs and then strengthening our response accordingly. We've talked a little bit about COVID, and I think we can all see how the global emergence of COVID has shown that linking gender equality and nutrition is even more critical than before. Over the past year, COVID-19 has had significant and negative impacts on global health, nutrition, and poverty, and it's exacerbated inequality related to food systems, gender equality, and also its increased gender-based violence. Already strained food systems and income sources have cracked further, resulting in the scarcity of nutritious food. And women and girls who are already some of the most vulnerable members in communities end up eating least, last, and poorer quality food. And in addition to this, there's estimates of an overall 30% reduction in coverage of essential nutrition services, so women and children are being left further behind as primary user groups for these services. I think we can all agree that our collective efforts to address critical gaps and build forward better will only work if we transform the way that we think about and act on the role of nutrition in achieving gender equality, and not just how gender equality can achieve better nutrition. It's not enough to apply a gender lens on top of the many existing systems and structures that impact the nutrition of a woman or a child. An effective response requires that we make gender equality the central foundation upon which multi-sectoral responses to nutrition are built. So with that call to action, let's go further into the gender transformative framework for nutrition, and I'll hand it over to my colleagues Amal and Geneviève, who will actually walk us through the framework now that we've set the stage.
Many thanks to the two Sarahs. Let me hand it over to Geneviève and Amal to introduce themselves and to walk us through the actual framework.
Thank you, Sarah and Sarah. Hi, everyone. My name is Geneviève Nimouté. I am a gender advisor at CARE Canada. Amal, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, my name is Amal. I'm a health and nutrition advisor at Save the Children Canada based in Ottawa.
Great, thank you, Amal. So Amal and I are going to take our group into the actual framework. Let us start by saying that the Gender Transformative Framework for Nutrition is a conceptual model supported, as our colleagues were saying, by research and practice. And the model seeks to improve gender analysis as well as solutions design and monitoring and evaluation of nutrition approaches, as well as interventions promoting women's and girls' empowerment. The GTFN applies system thinking. It enables users to critically think and examine the multi-sectoral drivers of malnutrition using a gender equality and empowerment lens. By exploring the complexity of factors across systems that interact and foster or limit empowerment, the framework helps to identify areas for action that not only improve nutrition outcomes, but also transform gender relations, empower women and girls, and create more equitable systems. The The GTFN is composed of inner and outer rings. Let's start with the inner rings component. Next slide, please, Allison. Awesome, thank you. So the inner rings. The framework seeks to apply women's empowerment theory to nutrition, as we said earlier, and it puts women and girls at the center of the process. This framework was based on a review of established empowerment frameworks, including the works of Kabir, Sen, Alsop, and others. The essential idea is that the three components of the empowerment framework, that are agency, resources, and opportunity structure, reinforce and build on each other to facilitate empowerment. Leaving out one component means leaving out an essential ingredient, and the recipe or the project may not work and actually be transformative and enhancing nutrition for the entire community. Let's first start with agency. At the center of the framework is the concept of agency, or the ability to define one's goals and act upon them. Agency is not just about observable action, but also the intimate sense of agency, the power within that motivates and inspires action, a form of critical consciousness. While agency is often defined as decision-making power, it also reflects the ability to bargain and negotiate, or sometimes in negative terms, to deceive, to have power over someone. But more importantly, agency is not just an individual process, but also a capability that can occur and be strengthened through collective action. So the first important component is agency. Let's move on to resources. To exercise agency, a person needs resources. Oftentimes, these are thought of as financial or material, but they can also be human or social. Less often considered examples of resources are time, information, mobility, and bodily integrity. According to theorists such as Naila Kabir and Amartya Sen, resources and agency work together to create capabilities, the ability for people to create the lives they want. Finally, we consider another ingredient in our framework, and those are the formal and informal systems and institutional structures that can either enable or hinder empowerment. These are called opportunity structures, as described by Alsop and Saul. Those are formal systems that includes such things as education, the education system, the formal economy, local governance structures, or institutions such as local health departments, etc. Formal systems usually have formal structures and official policies and procedures that govern it. Informal systems, however, are social constructs, the social cultural norms, beliefs, and practices that exist at the individual, but also at the household, community, and broader societal levels. All formal systems are influenced by these social constructs. It's just that they're not written down anywhere. It's, for example, accepted behaviors in the community, or accepted and expected behaviors in a community, boys clubs and companies, etc. The opportunity structures define who has power and resources. So ignoring this ingredient will limit the impact of any progress in other areas of the framework. One last point we want to make is that being empowered in one domain of your life can have knock-on effects, positive or negative, into other areas of your life, or it may be completely separate. For example, being economically empowered by earning and controlling your own income may give you more influence and decision-making power in your household. However, it can also lead to conflict and increase the risk of intimate partner violence. but it won't necessarily lead to your political empowerment if women are not allowed to vote. So if we're missing a component of agency, resources, and opportunity structures, even if we're making gains in one area, it may not trickle down to the entire components of the inner ring. Women's empowerment occurs when each of these elements, agency, resources, and opportunity structures, are activated and mutually reinforced. A key element of applying women's empowerment theory within nutrition programming is to understand that power imbalances and resulting gender inequalities have a direct impact on the nutritional status of women and girls, and that poor nutrition is fundamentally disempowering. And now I will let Amal give us more explanation on the outer rings of the conceptual models. Could we get the next slide, please?
Thanks, Jen. So as we did for the empowerment framework, for sure, building the outer ring started with also a very rigorous literature review. So we reviewed the existing framework of gender and nutrition. Of course, we saw the adaptation of the UNICEF framework that I'm sure you're all familiar with, and really trying to look at how gender norms and inequalities could be addressed within a new framework. There's been also a rapid evidence review to really identify the associations between empowerment and nutrition. And you know, we came up first with 1,000 articles to really first that could describe those studies exploring gender and nutrition. Then we added some inclusion criteria on the literature review, and we included articles who really reported indicators of empowerment, whether in a direct format or indirect, and nutrition. And we ended up with only 41 that fits this inclusion criteria. So it gives us already an idea of maybe the, you know, the research gap that is presenting this, this research. So using the snowballing technique, other papers were also included in the review over a one-year period, sorry. So as we were compiling the research, we also used the UNICEF framework on the causes of undernutrition that was developed in the 90s to organize the findings. And because the UNICEF frameworks identify the immediate, the underlying and basic causes of malnutrition and also recognize the multisectoral dimensions of it, it's helped us provide really a solid foundation from which we were able to unpack the different domains of malnutrition while also considering the complexity of empowerment and gender norms. We really had a full, maybe, I don't know, a full 6 months where we wrestled with many versions of how we should conceptualize this framework. And with the help of graphic designers, etc., we came up that maybe, and also the coalition felt that maybe a linear representation was very limiting on how we can show that interrelation between the domains. So we landed up with an outer rings that has those 7 domains that you can see on the screen, which I'm just going to name. So we have safe and equitable access to WASH, gender and adolescent responsive health systems, social inclusion and reduced violence and trauma, equitable food systems, equitable education, gender responsive dietary and care practices, and climate and good political resilience. So what you need to understand is that these domains are all pieces of the puzzle, and they're all critical to achieve the ultimate outcome of gender transformative nutrition. And as you will see as we dive into an example, when there's an activation of kind of the inner ring, or as one can imagine, we try to make them look in a graphic design as gears, the interplay between building agency, accessing resources, and opportunity structures. So when intervention operate at all on all these 3 levels, this is when we expect to see gender transformative nutrition programming. So we really want to put gender equality and women's empowerment at the heart of our nutrition efforts. And we thought that maybe now we can walk you through how these different rings can interact with each other by taking one example and one dimension. So by taking, for example, the food system, we know how gender power dynamics and social cultural norm are really significant drivers within the food system. We also know that women are actively involved in the food systems in many roles, but often their contribution is not formally recognized, and they really face obstacles to engage in a meaningful way on equitable and fair terms. So if we take the equitable food system domain, and let's just look at agriculture specifically and unpack it using the women's empowerment framework. So just to let you know that we know that this is not a comprehensive kind of example that we're providing here. We're just covering, the research on empowerment pathway within agriculture. So it's just an example to give you a little bit of a taste of how we dive into this framework. So if we start with agency by looking at the inner ring, right? What would be the problem? We know that women play a significant contribution in growing crops, in fishing, in producing, processing, and marketing food. But unfortunately, most of the time they might like, decision-making power over the production process. Their work might be invisible and undervalued. At the individual level, a woman might internalize attitudes and values that play a significant role in her expression of power. So in many cases, intra-household power imbalances result in women having less equitable voice in family negotiation to decide what to grow, what to consume, and what to sell. So these inequitable power dynamics will result in women farming, producing less than maybe their male counterparts, experiencing maybe greater yield losses, and maybe also being less likely to benefit from their work. So Jen, what could be a solution to that?
A solution to that would likely be, or ideally would be, a gender transformative approach, which would enable us to look at ways to increase women's decision-making power and ability to set and achieve their own goals regarding, regarding her production or their production and work. For example, by facilitating women's groups that take a participatory learning approach to support members to identify challenges and workshop local solutions to improve production.
All right, so now moving to the second ring, that is resource. So here we have, and it's a very important element, right, to ensure women's power within food system, which includes really strengthening access and power over productive resources, such as the tools, the technology, the inputs, the land resources, whether it's in quality or in size, and the financial services. So I'm sure you have read already numerous examples that shows the limited access and control over productive resources for women in the agriculture sector. There's also a lot of unrecognized and undervalued labor done by women that has resulted in agricultural technology development that is maybe gender blind. For example, this has led to larger investment in technology development to support specific tasks that men are usually responsible for, which will help them save time. And there's limited research and investment in crops, farms, processing, and technology that would predominantly benefit women. Land resources, and this is a big problem, but land resources allocated to women are often further from home, and those that are dedicated for men, which results, for example, in additional time burden for women to travel from home to the field. There's also limited access to information within the food system due to low literacy and gender-biased targeting of, for example, extension service providers. So really, these inequalities in access to and control over assets will limit success in agriculture and reinforces power inequalities between women and men within the household and the community. So Jen, again, what could be a response to that?
Thank you, Amal. Once we've looked at agency, as we've shared with this collective earlier, the other step is to also address resources. A gender-transformative approach would look for ways to put resources in the hands of women and other marginalized groups and ensure that they have power to decide how they are used. Ensuring women's power within food systems includes strengthening access and power over productive resources, including tools, technology, input, land resources, and financial services. Women also need the same access to land, education, and inputs that men currently are offered. Within the value chains, tools should also be benefiting women investing in tools that women need in their specific tasks. Amal?
Thanks, Jen. So now the final ring, that is the opportunity structure that you see there. So if we look at the formal sphere, which are the enabling environment, so the policies and the institutional structures within the food system, we see that that is kind of continuing to discriminate against women. And the clear example is, for example, the legislation regulating ownership of land, and the title to land is generally given to the male head of household, right? So those gender-blind legislation, often result in men benefiting more than women from public programs by providing access to credit, agriculture extension, even marketing services in a very disproportionate way. In the informal sphere, if we look at women's restricted mobility and autonomy, that often mean that women are limited in access to labor markets. Women need to negotiate more for permission to participate in public sphere, etc. So these are really some examples of the gender inequalities within the enabling environment that should be recognized and should be tackled within our sector. Jen, a solution?
We recognize that changing systems and structures is hard. But it can start with engaging key influencers in the community in a gender transformative approach to build understanding and allyship. This includes engaging men, but also traditional and community leaders and other decision makers in dialogue and action. To conclude on this specific example, creating a more sustainable food system means not only acknowledging women's pivotal role in nourishing it, but also uplifting women in their current efforts and potential to be agents of change. Enabling girls and women to achieve their full potential is essential for building the productive, resilient, and sustainable food systems that nations need, as well as empowering them to make strategic life choices. We also want to point out that this example represents the application of women's empowerment within one domain. But the intention of the GTFN is also to understand and unpack the complexity of multiple systems and individual women and girls may interact with, and how change related to empowerment within one domain affects changes across the whole ecosystem. One of the most interesting components of the GTFN is how it centers women's empowerment and voices. That shows the interrelations across different domains and get us thinking in a more holistic manner. The framework is not static nor linear. We've given you a presentation of the GTFN. We now believe that it may be the appropriate time, Allison, for some questions and comments.
Yes, exactly. I'd like to open it up for our guests to either you can raise your hand, speak up, or insert any comments or questions in the chat box, whatever you feel most useful. Oh my goodness, here we go. Okay, so yeah, please use the chat box to ask questions to the panelists, and then we can respond to them. So the first one, really fascinating and well thought out. This is from Charlotte Gallagher Squires. I'm interested in the order of the intervention types. It seems like interventions that enhance the decision-making of individual women is done first, and then resource access, and finally changing system and structures. Have I understood correctly, or should interventions tackling each domain be done simultaneously? Does anybody want to tackle that, or do you want me to tackle that? Why don't I go? So great question. Thank you, Charlotte. I think the idea is, and we'll talk about this a little bit more when we talk to actually applying the framework to doing analysis and program design, is the idea is to look for opportunities to do all three when you're planning a program. So to really understand when you're doing a nutrition program, where is women's decision-making hindered in terms of being able to make informed decisions about nutrition, and so to look at ways that you can improve their agency and decision-making capacity, look at how they're controlling the necessary resources that would help them actually act on those decisions, and then also be looking at the social structures that are surrounding them that will either support or inhibit them to be able to take that action. So they're always sort of all working together simultaneously. So if I take an example of, let's say, adolescent nutrition. So if we're working with girls in schools to improve their nutritional status, we could have girls groups that were facilitating to give them information on nutrition, but to also facilitate problem solving, decision making around how they could actually improve their nutrition. At the same time, we would probably have some sort of, perhaps there could be a parallel intervention at the school that would also be supporting them, or perhaps changing, apologies, I'm thinking on the fly here, school meals or those sort of supplementation in terms of their access to the actual food themselves. And then opportunity structure, maybe engaging their parents, so that girls aren't the only ones who are thinking about improving their nutrition, but getting parents, teachers, community influencers on board. And that's that opportunity structure to support them to take action. So it's all working together. Any other questions?
Yeah, maybe I could add that, think about it as the socio-ecological approach, where we have the individual, but we can't take it in silo, and we need to also consider the environment that is surrounding. And so we want to act on those different levels to really make sure that there's sustainable results as well. Because if you change only the self-esteem of an adolescent girls, but you have really limiting policies and practices in place, then it's going to be hard for her to even express that that self-esteem in a proper way. So yeah, definitely working on them simultaneously, I think, would be the ideal scenario here.
And it could also be like quite disempowering if you're going to have a girls group to engage them and get them motivated to improve their nutrition, and then they don't actually have the resources or support systems in place for them to actually take action. That can actually have the opposite effect, right? It can be quite disempowering. So we want all of them to sort of work together.
And Allison, not only that, it could potentially put the adolescent girls at risk, right, of backlash or experiencing different violence potentially as well. So yeah, we strongly recommend working with multiple individuals and multiple levels at the same time for that very reason.
Exactly, that's great. Okay. if there aren't any more questions, I thought maybe we could talk about, because this has been very theoretical, and we do want to be able to actually move to applying this in a more concrete manner. So we've been doing some thinking about different tools and strategies that we can give, particularly nutrition practitioners, to be able to design and then implement, monitor, and evaluate nutrition programs that take this multi-sectoral empowerment-based approach. So our concept here is to actually develop a GTFN project cycle toolkit that will provide different tools and guidance along the project cycle. So the first phase being in the typical project cycle, the actual identification of the objective or the need that is identified. So in the previous example, we were talking about improving adolescent nutrition. So providing tools and support to help with that problem definition and defining needs that incorporates the concepts of women's empowerment and looks at across all domains, not just one. And then we'd like to move into further support around design. So once you've identified what the need is in the design phase, you're designing the solution and developing the project plan, and then further guidance around implementation, monitoring and evaluation, and that feedback loop that we have. So that's our hope. So as I mentioned, we've been mostly looking at right now the identification phase and thinking about the types of guidance that would be particularly useful to nutrition practitioners. And when we were thinking about that, we thought about these sort of three areas where we really want to develop some guidance. So first is around thinking multi-sectorally and thinking across all domains. And that's because what we find sometimes is you can get into a particular silo where you're just doing maybe agriculture programming, or your expertise is really in health systems work, et cetera, in one particular domain. But we would like to break down those silos and open people's minds to how can we actually start thinking about the interplay between the different domains and how maybe action across domains is needed to be truly effective. And then we also wanted to look at providing guidance on how to actually define the problem in terms of agency, resources, and opportunity structure as part of a gender-based analysis, which a lot of organizations do when they're doing program design, or sorry, problem identification, but to give them additional tools that they can add to their existing processes. And then finally, we were looking at doing some guidance around feminist and intersectional approaches that can be applied at the problem identification phase and then feed through design, implementation, and so on. So we've really started right here, and what we want to cover with you today is in this left-hand corner, thinking multi-sectorally across domains and starting to break down those silos. So the first tool is what we're calling is our GTFN and brief template. And its purpose is to provide users with a national level snapshot of gender inequities across the different GTFN domains. So food systems, education, WASH, etc. And it's using just secondary data that's existing. And it's an attempt to distill the complexity of the many gender-related drivers of malnutrition across these different sectors in a digestible yet hopefully informative format. Let me see if I can flip to it. So the tool summarizes key gender-related indicators for each domain, attempting to focus on distinct measures of agency and decision-making, resource access and control, and opportunity structure, thinking both formal and informal systems. And these indicators are then used to create a heat map to show where the greatest inequities exist in each domain by the different empowerment concepts. And again, as I said, we want the users to use the template to break down silos between different domains and facilitate a dialogue within their organization about the many gender-related drivers of malnutrition in a particular context, and to help them identify areas for further inquiry as they move into further analysis and likely do some primary data collection. So this template is certainly not meant to be a comprehensive gender-based analysis. It's really a taster menu is what I've been calling it. And it gives just a starting point to expand users' perspectives in terms of the gender nutrition link and the multi-sectoral aspects to it. And so a full gender-based analysis is most definitely still need to be undertaken. The other thing I would say is that in our sessions today, when we go into breakout groups, we really want to be testing this concept with you. This is not a finalized tool. I'll talk a bit about how we've done indicator selection thus far, but it's not finished. I think what we're hoping to do with you over the next hour is to get your thoughts in terms of the process that we've done, how you would refine it, and then to really test this concept of, does this heat map actually help you to make better decisions about where to do further analysis around gender and nutrition? Does it assist you to sort of see the different levels and complexities in an accessible way? So I'm going to speak briefly about the indicators that we have in the tool so far. So what we did was we reviewed existing secondary databases and looked for indicators for each domain that captured those different concepts of agency, resource access, control, and opportunity structure. So we looked at the SDG tracker, since that's an established tool that countries are using. We looked at the World Bank Gender Portal, the DHS Women's Survey data, and the Center on Gender Equity and Health's Emerge platform as just some of those examples. There are others such as FAO, et cetera, depending on the domain specific and looking for those existing databases. We tried to prioritize the indicators that were used by the SDG tracker since they are internationally accepted. And we looked for indicators that were widely available and validated for most particularly low and middle income countries. The coalition members then each were assigned a domain to refine the indicator list once we had that sort of menu, and they consulted their sectoral experts in their organizations for this first cut. And then we attempted to impose some thresholds to be able to color code scores on the different indicators at a national country level. Again, these are in very much still placeholders. These thresholds are not finalized, again, because we're trying to just test the concept, and there's much more refinement that actually needs to be done. And we found that, you know, some domains had many indicators to select from, whereas others had very few. And we're going to give you the example of food systems, where we'll look at the indicators we've found so far and have selected, and you know, where there are gaps. And then sometimes we found it actually quite hard to find indicators for other areas, or to actually break them down into, are they measuring agency, resources, opportunity structure, because they just weren't there. We did try to find at least one indicator per empowerment component for each domain. And like I said, we were not always successful. In some cases, we have multiple for one domain. And a challenge for us is, how do you select? How many indicators are sufficient for each domain? Again, thinking that this is not an index. This is not supposed to be a clear and comprehensive analysis, but something that is going to point you in the direction of where some opportunities and gaps might exist in terms to apply to a gender transformative approach to nutrition. So our goal through this workshop then is to test this GTFN in brief concept with you through breakout groups. And our overarching question for you today is, how can this tool be shaped to meet your needs in problem identification and nutrition program design? So we're going to move into breakout groups shortly, and we're quite ahead of time, I believe, about 10 minutes, which is a miracle. So why don't I just pause for a few questions before we go into those breakout groups? All right. Here, I'm just going to show you a quick example of, so this is what you're going to be talking about in the breakout group. So the example of the indicators that we've selected. So we'll go through those in the breakout groups for equitable food systems. As you can see, there's 3, but we can't find one for agency, and we'll talk about that. And as I also talked about, some of the challenges that we're struggling with and would love your thoughts on. So if there are no questions, I'm going to suggest we move into breakout groups. So there's going to be 4 breakout groups, each with 2 facilitators, and we're going to walk you through a few questions, use some Jamboards, and hopefully stimulate some interesting conversation. Anybody else on the team have anything to add before we break out?
Just very quick thought, but we would be interested in learning from your experience as well, how you're doing a gender assessment and what are the gaps that you might encounter when you want to really start designing a nutrition programming, and learn from your experience really in accessing data, processing the data, analyzing it, what does it mean from a gender lens, etc. So please feel free to enrich the conversation here and yeah, dive into it with us in the breakout groups.
That's great, thank you. So I'm going to turn it over to whoever's going to assign us to our groups, please.
Awesome. Yeah, I have the breakout groups all queued up.